Hi all, my name is Sophie Sahalik and I am the Director of Training and Development at Philanthropy Impact. Today I'm the moderator. Welcome to the fourth in our Walk in My Shoes web series, a space for ideas sharing, collaboration and solidarity for our members and the wider network. For those of you new to this series today, we set it up in response to COVID-19 pandemic, and it is our hope that these video conferences will be a place to bring discussions to you wherever you find yourself today on topics affecting you on a daily basis in your work both with clients and colleagues, with an emphasis on philanthropy and social investment. We want this to be a place for you to hear from your peers on how they are preparing to tackle the growing concerns in this confusing time.
Our MPT UK, National Philanthropic Trust UK. I'll just give a 2-second summary of the background because it will be helpful for everyone on the call. We are a UK charity, but we are part of a global group of charities that was founded 20 years ago in the US. So MPT, National Philanthropic Trust, is a very large US donor-advised fund. In the UK, we were born just under 5 years ago, first of all to service US connected clients, so those that were, that had to pay taxes in the US and needed a dual qualified donor advised fund. But then we launched last year a UK only focused donor advised funds for private clients here in the UK, but also global families. And what I would say is what we've seen on both sides of the Atlantic, and I'm sure that is the case for all the other panelists, is a tremendous response to the COVID-19 crisis, both in terms of new money coming into donor advised funds. So I often get asked that question, are donors diverting money that would have gone to other charities? What we're seeing is actually a lot of donors are either opening up new donor advised funds or funneling new money into their DAFs. And then of course we're also seeing a huge uptick in grant making from DAFs. In terms of sort of MPT as a charity and our response to support the donors and the wider sector, we've done a lot to help our clients navigate the landscape. As you know, there's so many response funds and different initiatives that have been set up all over the world to respond to the pandemic. So we've set up both in the US and the UK a resource and response page, which I'll share with panelists. That's been really helpful. And we've also started guidance for advisors, which I can come on to a little bit later. We've seen some amazing grant making going on from our donors, from really local initiatives supporting food banks, etc., to really large scale grant making supporting big foundations like the Gates Foundation in their long-term efforts to find a vaccine, etc. So it's been a whole plethora of things, from local to really global.
I think for those who are less aware of donor advised funds, the fact that you can set up very quickly, and it's like having your own charity, but has the ability to donate across the charity spectrum at a time of crisis, that maybe it's supporting things that they wouldn't naturally have supported. It does seem like the donor advised fund is a pretty good vehicle for that. David, I suppose from your perspective, you really see from a CAF point of view the scale of giving. Are you seeing that it's in terms of awaiting a lot more people wanting to do things and setting up new funds, or is it a case of people who already have funds quickly mobilizing and deploying that money?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we have a combination. One of the great things about DAFs, as Natalie suggests, is that the money is already ring fenced for charity, so it's already there waiting to be granted out. And so if the client wants to react quickly, the money is already there, and the KYC checks have been done and so on. So we can react very, very quickly to an emergency like this. On the other hand, of course, DAFs were really set up for long-term, more strategic giving. So I think that just shows the flexibility that they can be used very, very quickly. And we've had a number of clients giving more than normal, but relatively small amounts to small local charities, unrestricted core grants, cash grants, and so on. but also others giving in their millions, you know, setting up, for example, Martin Lewis, you might have seen, you know, setting up his own emergency fund for £1 million, and then getting others to join him in that. And there's about £3 or £4 million in that fund now. So that all of those things can start with a DAF, whether they're small, unrestricted cash grants, or whether it's something much bigger and almost game-changing.
Which I think is exciting to see, and having that those examples of people using structures in a different way and innovating is heartening to see. Kitty, are you seeing from the Prism point of view? Obviously, there are a lot of large donors that you look after. Are they also applying sort of different innovations, or what's the stuff that you're beginning to focus on?
So very much in the beginning, it was donors supporting the causes they already were. So trying to bridge the gap before the government funding was released. So, you know, causes close to their hearts. I think our largest donors have been waiting to see the response so that they are more informed about when and where they do give. At the beginning, there was kind of a lot of announcements and not a lot of discussion of how those funds were being deployed. And now that that money is actually being distributed from some of the larger foundations, I think we'll start getting some data and more of a spread on the options of where donors can give. Other than our DAF that we run, Prism has a collective fund service, so that rather than an individual giving, we enable groups of donors to give. So we've had a massive response in essentially creating operational charities for organisations operating under our kind of governance and compliance. So Help Refugees, I'm not sure if anybody listening is familiar with them. They are the largest European grassroots organisation for refugees in Europe, and they raised £6 million with us last year, but where they've been focusing on refugees in France, Greece, etc., when the camp was when Calais was open, and then recently the Turkey crisis, they've actually just won the only NHS contract to have the NHS logo, because they are raising money for kind of frontline staff, for equipment, etc. So that's one example. We've had corporates looking to provide hardship funds for their employees that have been furloughed. So again, very dynamic giving model, either looking at gift aid for senior partners to make it more tax effective, but also providing a kind of operational structure, versus a fantastic group called Compassion London, that used to be Refugee Community Kitchen. They're based in London. They make food for key workers, homeless, NHS frontline staff. At the moment, they're making 2,000 meals a day. The hope is to be by 10,000 by the end of the month, a week. And they've just asked one of the big stadiums for their kitchen so that they can cook on kind of bulk, with a very clear social distancing volunteer structure, which is very difficult because groups aren't able to operate. You know, how do you package 2 meters away, and how do you make that compliant, and making sure that everybody's safe, but also getting work done and getting money, funds, food where it needs to go. So we've seen quite a traditional mix, and then also this kind of dynamic, responsive attitude from some new groups.
And would you say the collective fund stuff is where there's the disproportionate weighting of your time? So
yes, it's simply yes. The collective fund requires much more due diligence on receipting, reporting. We're making kind of third-party payments, so the level of due diligence is different than either gifts in the UK or overseas for a DAF. That's not to say that some of our DAF gifts aren't complicated, because some of our donors, for example, might want a loan scheme, or they're giving to a social enterprise or a not-for-profit. So there's complexities, but really the collective fund, the nitty-gritty and the time is yes, definitely weighted there.
And Natalie, you alluded to the use of advisors and how that's intermeshing with what you're doing. Are you finding that there's been a spike in questions and people wanting to come to you and form partnerships and find out a bit more information?
Yeah, I would say so, definitely. So we are known as a global organization for working closely with a lot of private wealth managers. In the US, we white label for a lot of private banks, so we are sort of the back office for private bank DAF, private client DAF programs, and we're starting to do that now in the UK as well. So we advisors sort of we talk to advisors pretty much every day, and since the pandemic, I would say that that's increased a fair bit, both in terms of advisors needing to offer a quick solution for lots of their clients, but then also to help them engage with their clients on a as we often talk about, in a different way. A lot of their clients are coming to them wanting to respond quickly, wanting to access resource and information quickly. So a lot of the advisors that we work with will turn to us for that help in turn. What I would say is that we also there's the very direct response that we're giving to advisors in terms of helping them with their clients through their philanthropic journey, but then also a lot of clients, and I'm sure you've all seen that, are looking now more urgently, I guess, at their estate planning and their wills. So we've also had a number of inquiries from wealth advisors around how donor advised funds can be used in that conversation. So we've spent quite a lot of time doing sort of small trainings for private wealth advisors, talking through how, one-on-one DAF teaching, really, to then help them enable their clients to have a DAF as part of their wider estate planning structure. So yes, absolutely.
I think that's been interesting trend for as we've seen with the bank's donor advised funds, having it structured into wills, but it's once people have discussed the possibility of opening up a fund, it's turned much more into in-life giving rather than it just being that's been put in a will, that you've opened up that discussion and it's certainly pulled it out into, well, we should kick on with it now. So it's an interesting trend. And I think with the other thing that we've seen is lots of donors are kicking on and doing it themselves as well. I think there's a huge place for advisors in shaping this, though, because big quantities of money are being allocated, and the more you can have advisors helping around and making sure that it's as targeted as possible. We've seen 20 million be given in the last 6 weeks, which is pretty considerable. And I think in the last 6 weeks, we've done, in terms of number of grants, the same amount of grants that we've made over the whole year, the previous. So it's certainly a scale game. But David, I know that from the CAF side, you also help collate very important bits of research, and you're usually a leading indicator on trends. Are there things that you're beginning to spot that maybe we haven't picked up so far in the discussion?
Well, a couple of things. From the charity side, you may have seen we've been doing this sort of regular research since the COVID crisis began, and I think that's really helpful in talking to advisors and to clients to put some data behind the need. So, for example, 25% of charities have seen a big increase in the demand for their services at a time when their fundraising capability has gone to practically zero in some cases. We've seen that 56% have said that unconditional cash grants are the most important things for them here and now. And I think we've seen a great reaction from the sector towards that. We've also seen that something like 37% of charities said they won't survive more than 6 months unless they get additional support. And the government will, of course, be providing some of that now with the 750 million, but that's still a long way short of, you've probably seen figures like 4 billion and so in terms of the income gap that they have. So the need is there, and I agree, when you're talking to the advisors or the clients, it really helps to put some of this data to them and say, look, you know, the stories are real out there. The sector is going to be incredibly damaged for a long time unless we act now. So I do think advisors and to some extent clients need to be encouraged sometimes to act and not just sit on their hands, because they've seen, you know, a reduction in their wealth, haven't they, over the last few weeks with the stock market crash. But, you know, that's where I think it's so important to engage with them and say, yes, that's true, but just look at the need out there and you can make a difference. And the advisors themselves can make a difference simply by opening up those conversations with the clients, you know, and getting it on the agenda. And that's on the charity side. On the donor side, as you may know, we do our DAF UK market report, and that's coming out this evening. And it will show the growth, sort of steady growth in DAFs in the UK. Contributions have increased about 10% to 575 million. This is 2017-18, so up about 10%. But that's a 130% increase in the last 5 years. So the DAF market, although very small relative to the US, is increasing quite substantially. In terms of grants out, it's increased to about 360 million, and assets under management have gone up about 17%. So you can see the growth in the market, but I do think that there's still a lot more we can do to get advisors involved, and, you know, and partner with them and say, you don't need to invest in your own team. You don't need to be experts in philanthropy and social investment. You know, we can help you with that. We can partner with you. And you won't necessarily lose any of your assets under management either, depending on the way that we do it.
Yes, it's only the markets that do that. One of the questions being put to us is, and this is to the group. There are experienced donors which are wanting to get money deployed quickly to new causes. How are you balancing that requirement for being able to prove to HMRC or to the Charity Commission that you've done sufficient due diligence against that requirement to get money quickly to areas that are facing substantial hardship? Is there anything you're doing differently around due diligence, or is it that you have to, whatever the case, you have to be secure in it, and so whatever time it takes is the time that it takes?
I'll just quickly say, Cass Sunstein, who's a behavioural psychologist, wrote in the Times on the weekend about sludge, bureaucratic sludge, that at the moment means that any administrative decision is slowing down money getting to where it needs to be. Now, sludge normally is helpful because it means we don't make mistakes and we have a process and a kind of due diligence to follow. At the moment, just because there is a crisis, it doesn't just mean, you know, we can send out to a good cause that looks okay on the website. Ultimately, HMRC and I imagine the Charity Commission will do a retrospective investigation in lots of these new funds, so we will be held accountable. I think being extra cautious in terms of possibly having wider conversations with other funders where we wouldn't normally, checking kind of news, trying to see any related partners, asking for references, I think adding an extra layer, whilst at the same time being conscious they might not be able to provide a set of charity accounts, for example. So that's one thing off the list. They might not have a board of trustees, or if they're on GoFundMe, for example, we're about to give to a big fund called Frontline Responders in the US, a large donation. Very fortunately, CAF America is their partner, so that is much better for us. So in terms of new groups trying to create structures, I'm hoping they'll have also had the thought that actually if they want to receive funds and be deemed credible, that they need to be looking at kind of serious outfits to operate under.
I might add that's very much the case we would see that in any case with, we make a lot of global grants, and I think we see that often, you know, we'll apply this sort of the same rigor and due diligence that we would under any grants, but with global grant making, for instance, there is that additional layer that Kitty is talking about. So, you know, being able to cross-reference information, being able to maybe speak to larger, more established organizations about a particular organization or initiative, certainly as we will apply that. The same thing is happening under this situation.
I think it's certainly helpful that so many emergency funds were created so quickly, so that structures are already there for DAF holders to support. So you know, we had a client who immediately liquidated the whole trust to support the World Health Organization's emergency fund, for example. And we've seen money going into the National Emergencies Trust and so on. I think where it gets more awkward is in the smaller local grants that need to be made, and how you do that in huge volume. I mean, we set up the CAF Emergency Fund, and that's already had 5,000 applications. And so, to your question, Rennie, how on earth do you deal with 5,000 applications efficiently? You know, we've given our principle that we want to get the money out as quickly as possible, you know, ideally within 14 days. And it's just required two things, really: lots more people getting involved from across the whole organisation. So we've set up these panels to review the grants. But also, I think, you know, a recognition that it can't be belts and braces on every single grant, particularly the smaller grants, and particularly to, you know, UK charities. So I think, you know, a differentiated sort of risk approach is always appropriate, but never more so than now, because if we don't get the money out, it'll be too late.
And something that your comments touched on was, yes, there's the immediate emergency response, which we need to get philanthropic money allocated to, but there's also this much longer term, I mean, complete decimation of the charity industry. And what are you having discussions with donors about, if you're a long-term philanthropist or a committed philanthropist, maybe you need a two-stage process, and you do need to hold back some funds for supporting and making sure that vulnerable people or certain causes continue to be operable once we're through?
I mean, Prism personally aren't. We're administrators. We're not advisors, so we don't do the strategy piece with our donors. Often, our donors come; they know where they want to give. In terms of our collective funds, again, they're very much doing short-term, long-term. I think looking at organisational resilience is probably a useful framework for donors. You know, do we save a charity for 3 months so that they'll fold once this is over, if that's a 3-month period, or you know, are we keeping them afloat for them to hopefully grow afterwards? But ours is very much donor led, so we're kind of cause agnostic and take their lead.
I would say in our case, in MPT's case, we're seeing that very much with our very large donors. So those that sort of make, you know, annual multi-million pound contribution and grants, you know, are very much have kind of split their portfolios in half, and you know, half is there to continue supporting either charities that they would be supporting anyway, or to, you know, help fill any gaps in the sector in the future. But then they've also diverted a lot of their assets to supporting charities now. That's mainly for our largest donors. Again, you know, same as Kitty, we don't offer specific philanthropy advice, although we do help donors to access that advice. With advisors, interestingly, with wealth advisors, they've come to us with that question a lot. And I do think that initially they were probably, it was hard for them to understand how they could advise their donors to give away all of their money right away. I think in the first few weeks we had a few panicky phone calls, but actually I think people are now starting to be a lot more strategic about how they're advising their clients between that short, medium and long-term giving. So, yeah.
I mean, I would love to see this collaboration continue, particularly with regard to the longer term and a more how do we create a more resilient sector, and how do we make giving, increase on a more permanent basis? And there is a lot of good collaborative work going on, the Beacon Collaborative, for example, where some of us are involved. But I don't think anybody's nailed it yet in terms of, what do we need longer term? What does resilience really look like? And how can we get the right funds and the right advice to the right entities at the right time? I think that's a great challenge to have. And, we're very open to having that sort of discussion, because, one DAF provider, one organisation is not going to be able to solve it.
No, and I think probably having the ability that we can show we can collaborate and come together and find best solutions, actually, that does seem to be one of the more heartening trends of what we've seen from things. Now, I see that we are coming right up against time. I did just want to quickly ask John that a lot of the how do we crack things could well come down to advisors in terms of unlocking that money and making sure things are allocated. Are you helping advisors putting up any additional resources through Philanthropy Impact?
All right. Well, what we're doing is we're moving online with webinars. The training that we do for advisors is really quite important. And we cover DAFs as part of that training. It just always blows my mind how little is known about them. So doing things like this is really important. The other issue, though, for me is since we did our own research, the number of wealthy people going to their advisors to get support in their donor journey has actually doubled. And so that's a good sign. But the other sign, though, is that the response from advisors is still relatively weak. And so there's still a lot of learning to do, and that's where the training comes in. On the other side, in terms of giving, it's really great, the amount of giving that's coming and how it's growing, but it's still a small percentage of the wealth in the country. And I think there's issues about how we're going to do that. And again, the research shows that advisors are key to that. And it's really good to hear that donor advice funds are actually spending time with advisors to encourage them to get involved. So thank you very much to all of you for this. That's been really great.
And continuing the theme of thank you, I see we are up at our 30 minutes. So Natalie, Kitty, David, I just want to say a big thank you very much for giving your time today. I thought that was a really useful snapshot of the different things that your organisations are doing. And yes, absolutely essential work. So thank you very much. And very good luck for the rest of it. I'm sure we'll keep on collaborating. So thank you.
And Renee, thank you.
Thanks, Rennie. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Rennie.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.